Well, hey there, and welcome back to the Empower Nutrition Podcast. I'm really thrilled today to welcome to the show Dr. Hehmeyer. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Erin. It is such a pleasure to be with you and your audience.
Same. I can't wait to pick your brain. I think we've kind of segued into similar spaces, and I can't wait to just kind of hear more about your perspective. And but I will have to admit that when I was looking through your thing, or your background, I was really fascinated in terms of all the different credentials you have, and specifically, it looks like you're you're a chiropractor, but you also have two different nutrition credentials that usually people will just get one or the other of those. So maybe you could just tell me how you got into the functional medicine space and a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, well, you might be able to relate. I always say straight lines are boring.
Yeah.
And so for me, health and wellness and being a part of people's wellness journey has really always been a part of my professional life. And it started for me in my 20s. When I opened up the first high intensity strength training gym in Chicago called Citywide Super Slow. 20 years in the making, go Citywide. So still there. And
Awesome.
it was such a fabulous experience and really gave me an introduction to what it was to meaningfully contribute to people's wellness journey.
Yeah.
And about 4 years in, what I got was I was ready to expand and elevate my ability to contribute. And so I sold my half of the gym. When I am in Chicago, I am a client, so still a huge fan. And I ultimately made my way to graduate school. And where I started with graduate school was in chiropractic school. And I went to chiropractic school because my chiropractor had always made a huge difference for me from the time I was 16, growing up dancing, tweak my back here and there kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of chiropractic school, I kind of had this aha moment. I admittedly didn't really know what I was getting into. And, it's a 4-year degree. We have 4 rounds of boards and we have the same fundamental training in diagnosis as MDs, but we are taught natural interventions, right? Versus pharmaceutical or surgical. And somewhere in the middle of that, the 4-year program, I had this aha moment like, wow, I could actually take this and work more as an internal medicine, natural internal medicine doctor. And so I shifted my, course load to emphasize that a bit more. And then ultimately layered on my master's of science in nutrition and functional medicine. Went on to complete my LDN and CNS and, IFM certified practitioner. And so when I say I'm a chiropractor, people usually get confused and tell me that their neck hurts. And I'm like, I'm so sorry to hear that.
But that's how I roll.
I'm trying to help you. But the education itself has really been a great foundation for me to take a data-driven natural approach.
Love that. So tell me about your practice that you have now.
Yeah, so my practice is called Well Empowered, and it's so great. Great minds think alike, right? We have the same kind of.
I know. I was like, she's got to come on.
So good. But yes, so I practice data-driven natural medicine, and people will often say, either who do you treat or what do you mean by data-driven natural medicine? And who do I work with? I work with people who are struggling with their health, with symptoms, perhaps with a diagnosis, or perhaps with chronic symptoms and no diagnosis. And, I would say the 3 most common things I work with people on addressing, like the root cause of. One is what I like to call sustained and empowered weight loss. So that's a big one I work with people on, removing physiological barriers, but also guiding people to get on their own side and ditch the all or nothing approach, right? So empowered and sustained weight loss mastery is number 1. The next one I would say is all things hormonal, right? Whether that's showing up as acne or menstrual cycles that are wonky or severe PMS or infertility or, just really struggling to shift into menopause in a way that has people feel good. So all things hormonal. And then the third one is all things digestive, right? Yeah. Whether that's bloating, constipation, diarrhea, all that fun stuff. Yeah. And, the data-driven natural approach is really putting the puzzle pieces together so that we can identify physiological points of leverage, like what's at the root of these symptoms and challenges, and how can we support the body such that healing occurs?
Yeah, awesome. So it is so interesting that you have the same empowered. We both use the word empowered. Did you know that my top 3 things are digestive, hormonal, and metabolic health are the top 3
No, I
things
love
I
it.
do?
That's perfect.
It cracks me up. But there's so much connection between the 3 that I feel like you can't really do one of them without doing a lot of the other 2. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure you experience this too, Erin, right? Someone will come to see me and they'll on their form and it'll say, digestion, or it'll say hormones. And then, somewhere along the conversation, sometimes they'll kind of like slip in, oh yeah, and I'd also like to lose a little weight.
yes,
It's like
yes.
I like healthy hormones with a side of weight loss.
Yes. Yeah. Can I just get that? Do you have a combo deal?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Tell me more about the data specifically, because I almost feel like people might think that sounds like, how does that go together? If you're taking a natural approach, that doesn't sound like data, and vice versa. So maybe tell me a little bit more about the specific.
Yeah, well, the natural approach refers to natural interventions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Data is, really understanding physiologically what's happening. So that means lots of labs is one piece of the data, right? And so both quote unquote standard lab tests and oftentimes specialty lab tests. And I'm sure these are a lot of the things that you dance in, right? Comprehensive microbiome assessment, or adrenal and sex hormones, or food sensitivities, or estrogen, the ratios, stuff like that. And taking all that data to help understand, okay, what is it that is causing this person to hold on to weight? What is it that's causing this person's, severe PMS, or, challenges getting pregnant, or bloating? So using all that data so that we can take a targeted approach. Also, not so much data, but better said information is, I'm sure like you, I spend a lot of time learning about the individual in front of me.
Yeah.
Right. There are things that people can teach us that we can never learn.
Yeah.
From a lab, of course. And they're both so important. They're so important, right? I need those puzzle pieces from the person, but I also need the puzzle pieces from the labs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's dig more into that. Like you were sharing a little bit about, for me, in terms of, like, let's say you do have somebody who's pursuing weight loss, and let's say they say, I've tried everything, I've tried every diet, and nothing's working. So it must be that I have a low thyroid. Like, what would you say to that person?
Well, the first thing I would say is, let's test it, right? Because I do not know the answer, right? Until I see labs. I can't read those things. I would love to have that ability.
Magic powers.
Right, exactly. That would be an amazing superpower. But so, first is like, let's gather the information now. And I'm sure you've had this experience too. 2 things. One is, it's very rarely the thyroid, right? It's more often than not, we do the deep dive. We don't just test TSH, right? We're looking at antibodies and free T3 and free T4 and all that good stuff. And even still doing a deep dive, more often than not, I would say 85% of the time, maybe even 90, the thyroid looks amazing, which is great news. Right now, in that 10 to 15%, where something is happening, right? The thyroid, there's, a legitimate autoimmune process that is to a point where that person either needs to do some pretty specific natural interventions and supplementation, or they would benefit from a medication, right? Either one. In that situation, certainly it's really important that person is well supported, right? That they have the thyroid hormones their body needs to thrive. That being said, it's very rarely the keys to the kingdom of weight loss.
Okay. Got it. So you shared with me that there's 3 essentials for empowered and sustained weight loss. What would you say some of those things are?
So 3 essentials. One is know your why. And I honestly think, Erin, that if every healthcare provider, MD, NP, chiropractor, acupuncturist, RD, right? Every healthcare provider really wholeheartedly invited their patients to engage in looking at, what do you want your health for?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, what does it actually make available? If you were to put yourself in a space
Mm-hmm.
where your health is as you intend it be, what becomes available for you in your life?
Yeah.
Because when people are connected to their why, the very nature of the conversations they have with themselves shift.
Yeah.
Right? When they're very clear that, okay, yeah, they want the number on the scale to be something, but really what it's about for them is getting dressed in the morning and feeling great.
Mm-hmm.
You know, going to a cocktail party and being able to fully be present.
Yeah.
Or being at work and feeling like you can totally bring your A game because your energy's great and you're confident in your own skin, right?
Yeah.
Those are just, you know, some of the reasons why someone might really be compelled to have this handled, right? But allowing people the opportunity to get connected with their why, that is one of the essentials.
Yeah.
You know, another essential I would say is getting that you're always saying no to something.
Mm.
You know, and you know, in talking with people, oftentimes when they're making shifts in their nutrition or in how they're structuring their lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
it can feel, especially if they're not connected to their why,
Mm-hmm.
like they're saying no to all things that are fun, right? It's like, oh, but pizza's fun. Oh, but
Yeah.
an extra glass of wine is fun. Oh, but, you know, right. But,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what people really get, you know, it's not to say you can never have a piece of pizza, right? But when they overindulge, and there's a difference between indulgence and overindulgence. When they overindulge, they are saying no to their health, right? They are saying no to feeling confident in their own skin and feeling like a total rock star at the cocktail party and, you know, showing up fully for the people in their lives and for themselves in a way that they really intend to,
Yeah.
right? So really getting, you are always saying no to something. And
Yeah.
so we want to choose our no's. We want to be responsible for our no's.
So interesting, because I think that what you're talking about is really important. And a lot of times I think in the integrative and functional medicine space, it does trend more towards just that sort of data-driven side of it, of like, let's get you the expensive labs, let's get the data, let's get you the supplement protocol. And it's just kind of assumed that your mind's in the right place. But I also find that it's incredibly important to focus on that. And it's kind of counterintuitive. Like if somebody's going to all the effort to find us, schedule with us, invest with us, wouldn't you think they would be connected to like why they're doing that? But actually, I think what's really kind of going on sometimes is there's like a societal expectation that might be the driver, but that's not really enough when like it gets hard.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's like actually what unpacking maybe the deeper benefits or the deeper reasons is important. But what do you think about the idea of sort of like, also if I find that more and more I spend more time thinking about like eating disorders and disordered eating and kind of putting ideas in people's minds of like when we start to talk about like priorities and reasons. I wonder how you feel about that in the context of like, for example, like the cocktail party. I would have totally 5 years ago been like, yes, 100%. Like, let's encourage all women to want to look great at a cocktail party. But now I'm kind of like, do women already have a lot of that? And like, how do we help them to kind of almost walk that fine line where it's like, yes, I'm saying no to overindulgence. Yes, I'm prioritizing my self-care, but not in a toxic way that is making me almost like orthorexic or like overly restrictive.
Yeah.
It's just such a fine line. I mean,
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a good point. And I will say in conversation one-on-one, I don't give any examples, right? I'm never talking about like, oh, so you can look at it at a cocktail party, right? But I'm really inviting people to write their story. And I actually do have them write their story.
Yeah.
So they self-author their intentions for their health and their life, right? And that's just themselves. I think I love what you're speaking to in the way of guiding people. Really, it's about feeling your best so you can bring your gift fully to the world, in my opinion. And, you know, supporting people in a journey that allows them to embrace their humanity and really answer the question for themselves, like tap into their wisdom in knowing, you know, in the moment, what is self-honoring, right? Because self-honoring is really, you know, that's self-love. And there's just none of the societal aggression in that. And so I will say the conversations I really cultivate with the people who I work with and invite them to step into are ones that do come from self-love, right? And really allow them to, you know, express their self-love in different ways in different moments, right? Because self-love on a Friday night, when you're with family you haven't seen for 6 months, and how you get together typically is play a board game and eat pizza, like totally fine. If that's your expression of self-love, like bravo, right? But only you get to say, right? I was talking to a woman earlier today who was sharing with me in these last few weeks. She's so cool. She's this amazing wedding planner, and she does these outstanding weddings all over the place. And she just finished like the home stretch of her major wedding season. And she was saying, you know, in these last couple of weeks for her, there were a few times, her husband's also super busy and they've got a little girl, where her husband said, you know, let's just order pizza. Let's just order pizza. And she said, most times she was said, thank you, no, thank you, right? That's not self-honoring. But there were some times where she said, great, perfect. And that was still self-honoring. So to me, you know, to let go of what is broken in what we've inherited around food and weight in our bodies, especially as women, of course, means to lean into our wisdom and start looking out for ourselves. What is self-love? What is self-honoring?
Yeah, I think just using that lens it's just really critical and so helpful as like a starting place. Maybe I'm curious to see kind of like, how do you fit this? What does the timeline look like for you with clients typically with respect to like this type of work versus the more sort of analytical, like, okay, we're getting your labs, here's the clinical plan, here's the diet and supplements. Like, how do you kind of find time for all that? And like, in what order do you tend to do that?
Well, so whenever I work with anyone, we start with 2 90-minute conversations. And, you know, I think about the first conversation is really gathering puzzle pieces and then identifying missing puzzle pieces. Those are labs, right? So we complete labs between the first and the second appointment. I also have them track nutrition and symptoms between the first and second appointment. And by the way, that at least partially leads into, you know, the third essential of weight loss mastery, which is being kind and honest. And more often than not, especially for women who've been at this for decades, right? They're left in a place where they see this is a broken system and I don't know another one, right? So either in this inherited perspective, I have the option of being kind, which means I'm not going to look, because I know if I do look, AKA be honest, I'm going to pick up the whipping post and start beating myself up, right? And so mastering that ability to be kind and honest is a cultivated skill, right? And so even just that nutritional tracker, which for a lot of people is super confronting out of the gate, and I'm sure you have this experience too, but there's a lot to be said for, you know, you and me being there, saying, it's okay. There's no shame in this. There's nothing, whatever you do, zero judgment.
There's no wrong answer. Just seeing what's happening.
So, you know, that's one of the puzzle pieces between the first and second appointment. And then in that second appointment, you know, we look at the information and we start to talk about what the path ahead would be. And then for those who, you know, it's not just a like digestion kind of quick fix sort of thing. It's more of like you were talking about shifting mindset so that they're able to shift consistent actions and therefore keep consistent outcomes from a place of empowerment, right? So for some people, it'll be a 6-month journey. For others, it'll be a year, and it really just depends on the person. And so it's definitely not the Whole30 approach, but by the time people reach my virtual front door, they're kind of onto the fact that it's broken, that Whole30 approach is just doesn't work.
And by that you mean like you go 100% into something super restrictive, whether it be points or like mini snack bars or perfect paleo diet, and then you expect life to change and you are able to sustain that indefinitely, and like that's just sort of that diet mentality.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me about maybe going along with that thread. I think that I see the same thing. I have like a whole membership that involves metabolic health and weight loss success that's sustainable, and it's, I think, to solve the same problem you're talking about of my stance on this is that yes, we don't want to buy into like toxic culture around women's bodies, but in my opinion, I wouldn't even say it's opinion. I'm just acknowledging the medical fact that our modern world promotes excess weight gain in most adults and even children, and there are metabolic and health consequences of that long term. So things that can affect those deep whys, like I want to dance at my grandkid's wedding and I want to be able to fly across the world and go on this dream trip. If I've got renal disease or complicated diabetes or heart disease, I can't do that. And so supporting in terms of metabolic and weight success for those reasons, I think is important, because people have tried usually many, many different solutions and they can't find something that works. And so tell me how you distinguish, like what is, okay, it's not going to be thyroid, but what's the thing that you do that is not just another diet? It's going to actually be like the right or successful thing that people are looking for.
So I would say a few things. One is really involving them in the process, right? There are physiological truths, right? By that I mean there is a physiological impact of certain foods and a physiological impact of other foods, right? And that's not good or bad. It's just true, right? And by physiological, I mean, for example, one of many things impacting your insulin, or impacting related to that, your fasting glucose, right? So impacting, if you're eating nutrient-rich foods versus pro-inflammatory foods, whether your body's in a pro-inflammatory state or not, right? So yes, there's educating our, patients on those truths, but there's also involving them in the change process, right? I heard a quote a few weeks ago that was, the only thing that doesn't get caught in a spider's web is a spider. And so, really having it be collaborative. Yeah, there's guidance and there's information people need in order to make intelligent change. And by intelligent, I simply mean changes that will allow that future they intend to be possible, right? That will be allowing them to progress to that future. And, support and cultivating strategies, but they also need to be part of that shift, right? It's a little bit like crossing the monkey bars. Only you know how long your arm is. I don't, And so knowing how long your arm is, and then also knowing that, guess what? Part of crossing the monkey bars means you're going to fall off the monkey bars. You're going to fall, and there's nothing wrong with that. And actually relating to it like there's nothing wrong with it, and how quickly the game is, okay, how quickly can you get back on the monkey bars and learn? That's all.
Yeah.
Just learn.
Yeah. Okay. So just kind of going along with this thread, I'm thinking about what you had sent me. It said there's basically, like, you think of weight loss and struggles with weight loss, or I guess I'd say weight loss resistance is, I like the way you phrase it, is like your metabolism has its foot on the brake.
Yes.
So tell me about some of the ways that happens, and sort of like what you typically do to help people with that.
Yeah. So different ways that, things that cause your metabolism to have its foot on the brake. One is when inflammation is high, right? People talk about inflammation. Oftentimes, I'm sure you've got this too. People will say, oh my gosh, I'm so inflamed, right?
Yeah.
And I'll ask them, how is that showing up in your body? And they'll say, oh, I'm bloated, or my skin's itchy, or my joints hurt, or they'll say whatever's true for them. And certainly, yes, inflammation can be an experience, but it definitely is a measurable number. Right. And so finding out, is there a chronic elevation in inflammation, allows us to be really targeted in addressing it. Because we know when inflammation is elevated, it absolutely puts the body in metabolic conservation, puts the foot on the metabolic brake, right? And, if you think about it, it's the genius of the body. Because if you think about hundreds of years ago, when people did not live in, like the industrialized societies that we do today, if they were out in the woods hunting and they, broke a leg, they better be able to preserve their calories, right?
Yeah.
So, it very much makes sense. It's just that, our environment has changed, but our genes and physiology really hasn't caught up to it at all. Right.
Right.
So one is elevated inflammation. Another one is, elevated insulin or decreased insulin sensitivity, right? When insulin is elevated, people are going to be, their body's going to be in, metabolic conservation, foot on the brake, metabolism brake. But not just when it's, lab norm, out of lab ranges, when it's suboptimal, I really like to see insulin kind of at like 7 or less, ideally.
Yeah.
And, the upper end of most labs is going to be about 19. So there's a big difference there.
Yeah.
And then the last one, another common cause is really, to say it a fancy way, detox pathways gunked up, right? So when detox pathways aren't flowing smoothly, toxins are reabsorbed. That's going to not, impact metabolism. Sex hormones are reabsorbed. That's going to impact metabolism, right? Our sex hormones go through the same detox pathways that the pollutants we encounter in our world go through also. So, when there's a kind of kink in the detox hose, so to speak, it will impact our hormones. It will impact our overall toxins, and that will affect our metabolism in an unfavorable way.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting back to maybe the first one, the inflammation, that's something that I work with and talk about a lot with weight loss. And a common question I'll get is like, what is the specific way? Like, what is the mechanism for that? If it's not changing, let's say it's not going to change thyroid hormones, like what kind of markers can we look at? And like, what is the way that inflammation specifically connects to your metabolism?
Yeah. So what we can look at is in the way of markers, HSCRP, right? High sensitivity C-reactive protein is a major chronic inflammatory marker. I do think of homocysteine as an inflammatory marker, and I do check that in people. LPPLA2, another inflammatory marker. HSCRP and homocysteine are the two I lean on most commonly. And, how does it impact our physiology? Okay, let me go back to my master's thesis. I wrote it on.
Boom. Mic drop.
10 years ago. Let me pick it up. But fundamentally speaking, when inflammation is elevated, it calls in macrophages, which are cells in the immune system, which fundamentally then further increase inflammation. And then your body tries to resolve it, but inflammation is too high. So it calls in more macrophages to try and resolve it, and inflammation stays high. It becomes this like almost hamster wheel kind of thing, physiologically speaking. And that does negatively impact insulin sensitivity, but it also negatively impacts the reception of any hormone, right? So insulin is one hormone. Obviously your thyroid's another hormone, thyroid hormones, that's a whole other set of hormones, sex hormones, and a whole other set of hormones. So, through the receptors being, like not very skilled at receiving the message. It's like a ball and a mitt kind of thing, right? The hormone and the receptor. That's a big way where
Okay.
metabolism is interfered with. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think too, sometimes what I'll see is they'll have, I think the mitochondria are very sensitive to inflammation. And so
Yeah.
you'll see where there's like impaired mitochondria health, and then that
Yeah.
in turn will impair basically like the ability to flip that metabolic switch and to move into like fat oxidation.
Yeah.
And that literally is what you're wanting. If you're saying you want to lose weight, what you're saying is you want fat oxidation, which is what your
Totally.
mitochondria need to do. And so you're
Yes.
just kind of stuck on high carb snacks if you can't flip that switch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
How do you, so like I'm imagining all of this, like if, like, let's say I want to know about inflammation, I get these inflammatory markers, and then I want to know about insulin resistance. So I get some blood sugar and insulin markers and maybe a CGM. And then I want to know about detox and phase 3 detox. So maybe I get like an organic acids test or a functional stool test, maybe look at beta glucuronidase. And now I've got all these labs. And how do you kind of take down the overwhelm of all this? Do you kind of do a stepwise approach where you'll kind of start with just one of these things? Or how do you kind of do that when you've got like the supplement plans from this, the diet plans from this? Like, how do you kind of put it all together in a way that's not overwhelming?
Yeah. So one is I spend a lot of time educating my patients, as I'm sure you do too, right? Because when people really understand why behind these first their personal why, but then also like, okay, these shifts that are going to ultimately land you at your ultimate why, right? Over time, right? They typically are able to do more than they would be in the absence of any why, right? A cookie cutter approach, because it's very customized, right? They can see like, oh, yeah, that number is high. And okay, now I give people, I call them fulfillment exercises, but basically it's homework, and it's educating them on some of the things that we're looking at and, physiologically speaking, stuff like that. So out of the gate, I do typically provide all recommendations with supplements. Not always, but mostly. Mostly the supplements are easier. It takes a second to get into the groove of things, but that's, once in a while I'll encounter someone who's, struggling to create habits out of it, but that's less rare than making the shifts to, nutrition. So when it comes to nutrition, it's two things. It's one, it's inviting them to, co-author their path, right? It's saying like, okay, here are the things that will make a difference. And in no reality do I wish you to commit to all these out of the gate, right? So let's talk about in this week ahead, what's one thing, what's one thing you'll step into? And so, people make change at different paces. So it's really honoring what's true. And oftentimes people will overcommit. And I'm sure you see that too. That's okay. It is okay for people to overcommit and, fall off the monkey bars and go, I overcommitted. And you're like, yeah, okay, great. Yeah. So some of those things people do need to learn for themselves, but it's helpful to have a partner, right? In saying, okay, that doesn't mean you're a failure. You didn't fail. It just means that didn't work last week. That was too much. So let's just pull it back and give you, let's talk about what you really can commit to in the week ahead.
Yeah, I see. So it's a little bit of a choose your own adventure thing. We're going to maybe have supplements that address things like a high homocysteine or maybe a impaired phase 3 detox. And then from those labs, here's kind of different dietary shifts that you can look at and consider implementing sort of like one at a time at your own pace.
Yeah, you got it.
Do you ever feel like people feel frustrated by that? 'Cause I get a lot of people that are in that mindset of slow changes, but then I get a lot of people who are really wanting to kind of like, maybe they're bringing that sort of like toxic diet culture to the table and they're really wanting to just kind of like go for it and change overnight, just huge shift. How do you feel about that in terms of like, do you think that's always bad, or do you think some people kind of have that type of personality and it's okay?
So I think whatever works for anyone is okay. But by works, I mean
Long term.
sustained
Yeah.
produces sustained outcomes, right? And so, is there a percentage of the population that can do sustained, robust changes? Yeah, there's a percentage. I think it's pretty darn small,
Mhm.
but who is it for me? Who am I to say that that's not you? Right. So if someone wants to dive in wholeheartedly and kind of take it all on and they're able to stay on the monkey bars, that's great. That's totally great. So, I take the same approach to cadence as I do with nutritional shifts. Yes, there are nutritional shifts, but I'm not categorically for or against, any one nutritional perspective. My question is, will that nutritional approach get you the outcomes you're committed to? That's one question. Two is, can you sustain it? Right? If intermittent fasting feels like punishment to you, then I would suggest you probably can't sustain it. And I certainly wouldn't want you to sustain it if it feels like self-punishment. Right.
Yeah.
And so, working with people to create an approach to nutrition that's both effective and self-honoring, that is a journey.
Yeah. What would you say are some of I accept that you're saying, okay, I'm not for or against any specific like diet ideology and patterns. So you're not doing that diet thing where you're putting everybody on the exact same way of eating, but let's consider the whole spectrum from somebody who wants to be like a raw vegan all the way to somebody who wants to be like a carnivore. What would you say within that whole spectrum are some of the shifts that you see tend to make the biggest difference for people with the specific problem that we're talking about of like where there's breaks on your metabolism?
So it's so different, right? Because I need to know what the person is currently doing that's not working.
Sure.
Because if someone's showing up in front of me and they have, elevated insulin, elevated inflammation, whatever the case may be, obviously what they're doing is not working, but I need to know what they're doing in order to effectively guide them.
Sure.
So that's,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's going to be like very different for each person depending on their labs and their different things that
their points of leverage, their personal points of leverage. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What are some of the biggest things that you tend to find when you do this lab workup with people in terms of things that could be up further, like better optimized, I guess I would say, or like another way of asking that is like when you make this sort of like choose your own adventure list, what are some things that you're putting on that list maybe the most often?
So on the nutritional front, I'm sure a lot of the same things that you would say, right? Lots more colorful vegetables, right? Reducing things that spike your insulin, simple carbs and sugars, right? Being mindful of how much alcohol you're consuming, right? And, making sure you're sleeping well. That certainly affects our metabolism. Finding time to be quiet and connect with yourself, right? Kind of self-care that, allows one to work with stressors and be able to ground into their wisdom when they're not in that quiet time, right? Because if you don't find your home base during quiet times, it's just, I don't know of any way that you can find it when things get noisy.
Absolutely. That's such a great note. It's so important. I guess obviously in our space, we probably attract people who are looking for maybe a medical or nutrition centric thing. And so it's so critical to kind of help maybe increase their awareness around that more whole person concept and how critical it really is. Because I see a lot of women sort of like burning the candle on both ends. They've got their job, they've got their kids, they've got their spouse, they've got all the things. They want to also go on trips and they want to self-care and they want to read the book and be in the book club and have friends and have a social life. And it's just a lot. And so it's just tricky, even if you say, oh, okay, it's time to start working out and it's time to start a meditation practice. It's like you can just be adding to that plate. And so I guess maybe it starts with like looking at that whole plate and having even making some kind of like tough decisions around like what are like that really the highest priorities of this space in life. And it's not an easy thing that I find like, I agree with you, like supplements are kind of like not always easy, but maybe the easiest. And the diet changes are harder, but even those like lifestyle shifts around just the habits around like sleep and exercise and stress management, I find those to be even harder for people.
Yeah, oftentimes, right? There's, gosh, what was it? There was a term I heard sometime during the pandemic when like everybody was doing was working, right? There was nothing else to do but work. But it was revenge procrastination. That was the term. And it was this woman talking about how at night, like she should go to bed, but it's revenge procrastination because it's like her only time to like do whatever she wants, and I just thought that was such a great term.
It is.
And to your point, right, for the women out there who are real like superhero women, right? They've got a job, they've got a family, and my gosh, superhero women who just have a family or just have a job, right? It's like so many things layered on top of one another.
Yeah.
It does take something to find a way to self-nurture and also self-soothe, right? We need soothing. We're grown adults. It's okay. We still need soothing, but doing it in a way that really aligns with our intention. And it's just a journey to discover that.
It is. It's so tricky because if you just look simply at that woman's life and you say, oh, here's the easy place to add exercise, cut out that Netflix habit, go to bed earlier, wake up at 5, workout, done. What you've kind of missed there is that might be her one time of self-soothing that she has all day. And it probably is. And so is that, how do you kind of reconcile that? It gets to, I find some even deeper things in terms of like boundaries and like workspace priorities and things like that can be, again, just very difficult and personal, but also can sometimes be the most important things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Dr. Hehmeyer, this was so fascinating. And I'm sure a lot of people want to learn more about your approach and how they can get your support with metabolic health and just with their overall wellness. What are some good ways for people to find you, and maybe share a little bit too about, I saw you do offer groups and one-on-one. Maybe you can just kind of share a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone who would like to, look at working together, you can go to wellempowered.com and you can schedule a complimentary 30 consultation. When you do that, please do mention Empowered Nutrition because that will get you 10% off if you do choose to proceed in working together. That will give us the chance to connect on the possibility of one-on-one work or group work. I will be launching the beginning of 2023, a group course that is centered on mastering your middle ground, right? Ditching the broken all or nothing approach. So good things ahead here.
Love that so much. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. So I hope everybody takes advantage to go check out your website specifically, and then to book that call. That free 30-minute call is super generous, and you'll have to keep in mind that you have that 10% discount available. So it looks like you're at wellempowered.com or on Instagram at wellempowered. You got that perfect
totally
matching score. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Jessie Hehmeyer. It was a pleasure to meet you, and we'll have to connect again soon. I think that we could probably talk all day. We could do another episode.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. We are 2 peas in a pod. Such 100%. A treat to be with you, Erin.
Same. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
You too. Bye-bye.